Hey, welcome to Flawed Masterpieces. Bryan Eckelmann here. I'm so glad to be with you again. And I'm here with Troy Deluca, one of our staff members, was a Sally student last year. And Troy, if you've been using some of the small groups materials, for instance, that's this guy over here. It's pretty cool. And we're going to talk today. Flawed Masterpieces is our new Bible study. We're talking each week about how the seemingly insignificant persons in Scripture end up making such a big difference. And that's a testimony for you and me that God can make heroes out of any of us, and it's all about God being in us. And our role, therefore, we can have tremendous impact even though we might have a small role in the grand scheme of things. Today we're going to look in John chapter 6. I invite you to turn to that. And it is Jesus feeding the 5,000. We're going to look specifically at the unnamed person in this story. It's a boy who brought a lunch to the picnic. And why don't you tell the story a little bit, Troy, about what's going on here and how this boy enters the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me. It's a privilege to be with you guys and to be with you, Bryan. Thank you. So we see this story here in John chapter 6, and right after Jesus and the disciples cross over this body of water, and they look back, and there are all these people following them. And Jesus turns, and it's Philip who he first interacts with, and Jesus says, "Hey, do we have any food? Do we have any bread?" And Philip says, "Wait, are you serious? Like, it might take a whole year or a half year's wages to feed all of these people."
And John, by the way, always wants to include us in the joke of the story. So John says Jesus said this to test them. So he's kind of having it out with he's having some fun.
Yeah, little comedic relief for us. In this Gospels.
Exactly.
You got to appreciate John for that. And so then we see Philip, and then actually Andrew, this who always seems to be going off to get someone else, right? It's just maybe his role, and we love him for that. And so he finds this boy, and even then he finds what could be the solution. We got to keep reading, but what could be the solution? And then he comes back and says, "Hey, I found this boy with a lunch," but even then, it wouldn't maybe not be enough to give everyone just a little bite. And so that's
right, because it's 5 loaves and 2 fish. Mm-hmm. Now, we think of loaves, by the way, we think of kind of a big, you buy a loaf of bread at Ralph's and it's a pretty good size or something like that. Loaves in that day were probably about the size of your fist or maybe a little smaller. And so it was very little, 5 little loaves, basically dinner rolls. Okay, 5 dinner rolls. 2 fish. They were dried fish, probably about the size of a large minnow or something like that. Not much. Nope. So, and Troy, what do you think? Let's put ourselves in the mind of this boy. What might have been going through his brain as Andrew comes over to him and says, "Hey, you with the sack lunch, get over here. We might need what you've got."
Yeah. Well, first reaction I think would be, who me? Not those guys over there. There's another boy over there. He might have lunch. So that maybe first reaction is just shock or surprise. But as I was pondering and kind of praying through this story, I think I kind of saw where I would see myself in the boy or us as in this walk of Christianity and walking with Jesus. I think I was thinking of, oh, what a privilege it would have been. Mm-hmm. And what an honor it would have been to provide this lunch for Jesus and these 12 who may have been these rock stars for that crowd. And why that whole crowd was there was for Jesus and these 12. And so as I took a moment to think about this, I was thinking about in the Christian life, we see so many...
So the celebrities are coming asking me for something. Yeah. At the same time, this boy is, the word boy in the language here means someone before his bar mitzvah. So 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, something in that range. There's another term for infant that usually went up to age 6 or 7. So we've got the general idea of his age. You remember your childhood a little more clearly than I do. Let's just put it that way. I'm guessing you were always hungry at that age. So it's not easy to say, hold on, I'm the only one who's got something. How are you going to take my stuff out of this?
And I think back of, always being hungry or like always looking in the pantry for a snack. And my grandma always had cut apples with cinnamon on it. And I was just like, man, if someone asked for that, I would be like, I guess, sure. But it would catch me off.
He's much more generous than I was when at that age. I was like, no, my lunch, you can't have it. And then there's also, who fixed this for him?
And so it could have been, his mom would have been, hey, I thought, you're hungry now? I thought I gave you food.
Mom's going to kill me. Right? Mom's going to be so upset with me.
Exactly. So, or maybe that was food for you and your siblings, and
that's true.
You decided to just give it.
We don't even know if he came with a younger sister, a younger brother, or something like that, and this was the meal that they were going to split. So there's sacrifice involved, and anyway, that's a pretty cool thing.
I think about just this idea of this boy not yet reaching the age of bar mitzvah, and so this young boy, and thinking about what it means that like a childlike faith and not to hold anything too tightly. I think about that, and that's as we're talking here, it just came into mind of, as you were saying, like the older we get, like maybe we hold on to things a little tighter. And so I think that's a good lesson just in the midst of this story for us.
Well, John is making choices here in how he tells the story. The other Gospels have this story, but John is the only one who says there's a boy here. So he wants us to think in terms of that little boy. And so I love the way you put that there's a privilege to that. Put yourself in the place of that child, if you will, that boy, and how would you feel if you sacrificed your lunch for the privilege or for the purpose of this? And it is a sacrifice.
And I think that word sacrifice in this story, and with that, maybe these rock stars of disciples, and thinking about so often in the Christian life, we're asked to sacrifice or to die to the self. And I think for us, the closer and more intimate we get to this person of Jesus and this walk with Jesus, I think the less it looks like sacrifice and the more it looks like privilege. I think that's a beautiful example of John bringing this in. And
I'm getting a phone call.
Oh, no.
Oh, dear. Okay, we'll stop the tape.
We're in the Super Bowl commercial break. All right. So this is the only miracle story in all four Gospels, and John chooses to mention this boy. And why do you think it's the only story that's in all four?
Jesus feeding the 5,000 is, every Gospel writer seems to say, this has to be in there. And I think it comes back to the fact that all four Gospel writers knew their Old Testament. The great story of God's provision to people was manna in the desert. And so bread coming from heaven was a key sign that God was with that person, and therefore that person should lead people to a new place. And so when Jesus provides bread in the desert, because they are in the wilderness, this is a remote place, they say. So they're in the wilderness. There is no place around for them to get food. There is a big crowd of people. They need to be fed. Yes, they're hungry. That's important. But they need to know that Jesus, that someone as great as Moses himself is here. And so Jesus providing bread in the desert for the people and food for the people is just so important to the Gospel writers. They want us to know that here is one that is even greater than Moses himself. The boy, I think that's John's just giving us a little more. He always wants to paint the picture in a slightly different place than the other gospel writers do. And it helps me at least put myself in the place of somebody in that crowd. And that's just so much fun. So, and this is an ordinary boy. This is an ordinary meal. It's a sack lunch that you might find pretty much anywhere at that time. Loaves and fishes were the basics of things. And yet, there's not just the ordinary going on here. Talk about the difference between what is ordinary and what is not ordinary in this story with Detroit.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that language, because it is just an ordinary sack lunch, and maybe perhaps an ordinary boy who was just there to see what was happening. A big crowd, there's excitement in the air, maybe.
Yeah, how'd you get there?
Yeah, exactly, right? Tagged in someone's backpack or something. But yeah, so this idea of ordinary lunch, ordinary boy, and what takes place here is this, simply put, ordinary into extraordinary. And I think that is just, if I had to categorize an aspect of relationship with Jesus, and what we get to do is take our ordinary selves and hand it over and allow Jesus and God to make it extraordinary. I think, and John always painting the picture, right? And I think the ordinary to extraordinary, and we see this on display for, as we may have little, it feels like we may have little to give, but Jesus will always make it into something extraordinary, perhaps sometimes without us even knowing. Yeah. And I love that.
Well, and it's also, it's ordinary elements into an extraordinary feeding, but it's also ordinary faith.
Yeah.
Philip has no faith, right?
Yeah.
I mean, talk about the difference between Philip and Andrew here. They're in different places in the story in some ways.
Yeah. Actually, Bryan and I were just talking about this. A scholar, Dale Bruner, actually grades them, and I was thinking it was like a funny grading system, but it's like this faith, right? Philip might get an F, Andrew might get a D or a C, and then you see this this boy who might actually get an A or a B, right? And we see this level of faith that kind of progresses throughout the story. Philip is in this doubting posture of, how are we going to feed all these people? There's no market close by. This is going to be 6 months' wages. We see Andrew who finds the boy, brings the boy back, or brings the lunch back, and still says, "Oh, I don't think this is enough."
What is this amidst so many? Mm-hmm. And Philip, and I have to say, working in churches, when we see great human need, we usually want to send the people elsewhere. And that's certainly in the other Gospels telling of the stories. Lord, this is a remote place. Let's send the people home to feed themselves. Mm-hmm. We in the church, when we see a great need, we usually want to just push the need away. Let's manage away from being the solution here. And Jesus says, no, it's your job. And wow. Yeah. That's the first thing. So Philip sees everything that's a problem. He sees the money issue. It would cost too much. He sees the people issue. There's too many. And he doesn't see Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's an F. Mm-hmm. And if then Andrew gets a C because he says, we have this. And then if the boy gets a B because the boy sacrifices, the strange part is you can't give either one of them an A. The boy doesn't know enough, probably, okay? And Andrew still, as you said, says, but what's going on? This is nowhere near enough. And yet they're a part of the miracle.
So that begs the question then, who actually feeds this multitude of people? Is it the boy? Is it Andrew? Maybe Philip? Or is it Jesus?
Who feeds the people? You know, it's this wonderful thing of, does Jesus feed the people? Technically, no. Because the disciples are the ones who distribute things to the crowd. The miracle happens in Jesus' hands. But the disciples get to feed the people. And and by the way, that's in all 4 gospel stories of this, is that the experience, therefore, is that you and I, in faith, we need to remember that Jesus is in charge of the miracles, but we are in charge of distributing what Jesus has. And does he need us? Maybe not need, but he chooses to use us in every way. And he chooses to use this little boy in this way. And so for each of us, there is both a responsibility to do that, to understand that we're not in the creation business. We're not in the manufacturing business. We're in the distribution business. And that's just so cool. And that's our job. Jesus is in charge of the manufacturing, but you and I are in charge of distribution. That's our privilege as disciples. And we can back into that. We don't actually choose it. Jesus pushes us toward it. But he pushes us toward it, number one, when our faith is very little. You know, Philip says, I just have this, but that's not enough. Jesus makes it enough.
Yeah.
So we can be doubting. We can be going, I have no idea how the Church of Jesus Christ is going to be the hope of the world, but I will still be a part of this experience. I think that's really what Jesus is trying to tell us in this story for us today. And yet, in my doubts that a church with all its problems, with they're not able to make budget, begging people for this and mismanaging that, if Jesus is a part of it somehow, even in my doubt, even in my uncertainty, my simple action of faith, however small it may be, that mustard seed faith, will still move the mountain. And that's because Jesus is in charge of the manufacturing. He brings the power. Or I may be the boy. I may be the boy where I simply bring a lunch, and I have no idea what's going to happen. I've just given it up. And I go, well, I guess I'm not going to eat today. I mean, that's the feeling I would have. Yeah. So the story ends with John letting us know that everyone had their fill and there were 12 basketfuls left over. Why does John, and frankly every other gospel, mention the 12 basketfuls? What do you think?
That's a great question. I think it's just the extraordinary act of Jesus is enough. Jesus is enough and more. And the fact that all 4 gospels choose to point this out, that there's 12 baskets left over, that is, one, that we came with this doubt of how in the world is this going to happen? How is this going to be possible? And then we're left with more than we ever thought or imagined we would need. Right? Just what a beautiful painting of trust. And when we let go of what we think is best and allow him to do what he's in the business of doing, the manufacturing of creation and miracles and just doing what he does best. And we just say, okay, God, here I am.
Yeah, and you got to think that the reason they say 12 basketfuls is because there are 12 disciples. And so if you are in the business of leading others to Christ, if you are in the business of feeding, if we are in the distribution business, we're not going to be left out in the distribution. We're going to have so much more. And I think if you and I have talked about this, I get to work with Troy every week. I love it. But you and I have talked about the fact that when we serve in Christ's name, we think we're giving out. And everybody says, oh, thank you for sacrificing your time and your energy and this and that. And, you could have gone to the corporate world and made so much money. And instead you came, we thought we were coming for the money, but we were misinformed, right? No, I'm just kidding. But in the process, what you find is that when you serve someone in need, they're so thankful for what they couldn't have gotten without you, but you end up getting more than you ever thought you had.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's just letting us know, go ahead and serve, go ahead and give out. God will always supply you more than anything else.
Amen.
It's so phenomenal.
Yeah.
What a great story. Wish I could have interviewed the boy. Wish I could have figured out what it's like. And it's so great. Good to be with you. Socially distanced here for a little bit. Wish we were a little closer. But I wanted you to get to know Troy Deluca here, and I hope you get to know him in the days ahead. Small groups materials and just doing so much stuff with home churches and with youth and things like that. So great to be with you, man.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here.
Fist
Thank you,
bump.
guys. It was a fun
God bless you, folks. And next week we will come back with, next week is Easter. We'll take that week off as we just celebrate the resurrection. We'll be back the following week for another Flawed Masterpiece. See you then.